They call it a temple. They carve its name into guidebooks like it's merely a place of peace, a holy site etched in stone and story. But the jungle remembers the truth. Beneath the lotus pools and beneath the sacred towers, Angkor Wat was built not just to worship the divine, but to terrify the mortal. Here, amidst the vines and silence, once marched the armies of the Khmer Empire, a civilization that did not rise by prayer alone, but by conquest. With sandstone stolen from mountains and slaves dragged from war, Angkor Wat was raised like a weapon, an architectural invocation of dominance. Its corridors were not just for monks, but for generals. Its symmetry was not only cosmic, it was strategic. This was no passive palace. This was a message to gods, rivals, and every soul who dared challenge the empire. We are divine, we are immortal, and we are armed. Welcome to Angkor Wat, not the peaceful ruin you thought you knew, but the stone citadel where holy war met high art, and where history bleeds from every crack. Part 1. Temples of War. Angkor's rise through blood and sand. Angkor Wat did not rise gently from the earth. It was dragged from the soil, one stone at a time, by the ambition of emperors and the hands of slaves. To the eye, it is a masterpiece of devotion, a lotus blooming in stone, but that is only its mask. Beneath the perfect lines of its towers and the celestial carvings of Apsaras, there is strategy, there is force, there is fear. This temple was born from war, and war never left it. In the 12th century, the Khmer Empire was not just a kingdom, it was a machine. Under King Surya Farmandua, its borders stretched from the Gulf of Tonkin to the Bay of Bengal, absorbing the lands of modern-day Thailand, Laos, Vietnam, and parts of Myanmar. But this was not expansion through diplomacy. The Khmer rise was forged in the crucible of battlefield victories, relentless logistics, and military dominance that was as brutal as it was elegant. Suryavarman, whose name means protector of the sun, was not merely a monarch, he was a warlord cloaked in divinity. He claimed the throne through bloodshed, toppling rivals in a civil war that left temples in ruins and rivers red. It is said that over 20 kings or princes fell before him, each a stepping stone to his coronation. Angkor Wat, his greatest construction, was not just a monument to Vishnu, the preserver. It was a monument to himself, the God-King, the eternal sovereign, the conqueror in sacred armor. The temple's alignment is not accidental. Facing west, the direction of death in Hindu tradition, it was a funerary temple, yes, but also a military symbol. West-facing temples were rare, and its orientation sent a chilling message. This was the seat of a king who ruled beyond life, a sovereign whose command would not end in death. Its concentric walls, rising higher toward the central tower, mirror the structure of a fortress. Wide moats, hundreds of feet across, did not merely protect against water, they created choke points, controlling access and isolating the sacred inner city in times of siege. Inside the walls, the bas-reliefs told stories, but not just of gods and demons. One, stretching for hundreds of meters, depicted the Battle of Kurukshetra, the Great War of the Mahabharata, a mythic slaughter etched for eternity. Soldiers march in tight phalanxes, weapons drawn, elephants trampling enemies underfoot. This was no religious flourish. It was a mirror, a message to the people, to the enemy, and to history. This empire is chosen by the gods because it can destroy. The carvings blend religion and propaganda into one weaponized myth. Scenes of kings receiving blessings from Vishnu sit beside images of enemy captives bound and kneeling. Warriors are shown alongside deities. To the Khmer, divine favor was not an abstract idea, it was proof of military right. If you won, you were blessed. If you lost, you were forgotten. Outside the temple, soldiers trained not in mere drills, but in ritual. Warfare and religion were indistinguishable. It is said that elite guards of the Angkor temples were trained in martial dance, a deadly choreography where every movement was both offering and offense. These warrior monks were not priests, yet they were not mere soldiers either. They lived under codes, practiced fasting before battle, and bathed in sacred water drawn from the temple's reservoir. Their swords were blessed, their armor engraved with mantras, and their deaths considered offerings to the gods. Life around Angkor was no less shaped by war. Commoners did not merely build temples, they built an empire's war machine. Rice, the lifeblood of the Khmer economy, was taxed and stored in vast granaries to feed armies that could march for months. Children learned to string bows from the age of 6. Smiths worked year-round to craft spears, axes, and arrowheads, many of which were buried with their users' weapons to continue fighting in the afterlife. Angkor's location itself was chosen with defense in mind. Ringed by thick forests and marshes, it was a natural fortress. Invaders from the west would have to cross mountain ranges, their supplies dwindling in the oppressive heat. To the east, vast reservoirs, barrays, could be drained to flood enemy paths or supply defenders in a long siege. These barrays were more than agricultural tools. They were military infrastructure disguised as devotion. But not all enemies came with spears. The greatest threats sometimes came with drought, with famine, with betrayal. Surjavarman's successors fought wars not only against neighboring kingdoms like Champa, but against each other. Royal succession was a blade that often pointed inward. Angkor, for all its strength, began to bleed from within. Temples were built larger, more ornate, more divine, as if more stone could hold back decline. But underneath the gold and incense, cracks widened. The Khams of southern Vietnam were not impressed by Angkor's grandeur. In 1177, they attacked not as pilgrims, but as pirates. They sailed up the Mekong River in swift warships, bypassing defenses and striking the heart of the empire. Angkor was caught off guard. Its moats were still, its warriors scattered. The invaders looted temples, set fire to sanctuaries, and desecrated the very altars once thought untouchable. For a brief moment, the gods seemed silent, but from that silence rose a new warlord. Jayavarman Tuju, the Buddhist king who would become the empire's most prolific builder, rose with vengeance in his veins. He took back Angkor, stone by bloody stone, and began his own campaign, not only to restore the empire, but to redefine it. Under him, temples became both hospitals and war memorials. His images were carved everywhere, serene yet unyielding, with the eyes of a man who had seen his capital burn. And so, the temple city continued to breathe war and worship in equal measure. By now, Angkor was not a place, it was a spell, cast in sandstone and enforced by spears. Tourists who walk its grounds today see stillness, but the jungle is only quiet because it remembers too much. It is the silence of ghosts, of old kings watching from the shadows, of prayers whispered over swords. Even the decay is strategic. Temples left to the roots and rains serve as reminders that power, once seized through force, cannot last without balance. The Khmer never quite found that balance again. They built higher, fought harder, but slowly, inevitably, the jungle began to win. And yet Angkor Wat remains not fallen, not forgotten. Its towers still rise like the heads of ancient sentinels, watching a world that no longer fears them. But the story is not over, because every stone laid in Angkor Wat was laid by war, and war always remembers its home. Part 2. The Empire's Echo. Soldiers, spirits, and sacred geometry. Even in ruin, Angkor Wat commands reverence. But if you listen closely, not with your ears, but with your blood, you will feel what still lingers beneath the silence. The Empire's echo. It thrums through the broken corridors and dances through fractured archways. It hums through the lotus ponds, whose waters once ran red. The soldiers are gone. The kings are dust. But their geometry, their message remains sharp. Sharp as a blade still waiting to be drawn. The very layout of Angkor Wat was a weapon. It was designed with a precision that rivals modern engineering, yet its purpose was not simply aesthetic. The Khmer architects, mathematicians, priests, astronomers, and tacticians, all in one, aligned the temple with the movement of planets, the solstices, and the equinoxes. They did not separate war from the cosmos. To them, battle followed celestial order. Victory was a matter of alignment, not just arms. At dawn during the spring equinox, the sun rises directly above the central lotus tower. It casts a shadow that pierces straight down the processional causeway like a spear through the spine of the earth. That was not an accident. That was design, cosmic intimidation, a message to both mortals and gods. This is not merely a kingdom on earth. It is an empire carved into the sky. The corridors were narrow on purpose, a tactical design meant to funnel intruders. The steps were steep, forcing all who climbed them to bow their heads. Even the architecture taught obedience. The entire site is a riddle of power, symmetrical, massive, omnipresent. Its sheer scale is crushing. 1 million blocks of sandstone, each weighing up to 3,000 pounds, hauled across rivers and jungles from quarries dozens of miles away. No iron tools, no wheels, just manpower, just control. Control, in Angkor, was total. It began with ritual. Every military campaign was preceded by weeks of offerings. Bulls were sacrificed, oracles were consulted. The skies had to approve before any army could march. But once they did, they marched like ghosts, fast, silent, deadly. Khmer soldiers were trained in discipline, stealth, and savagery. They moved through the forest like smoke, striking with organized fury and fading before counterattack. Scouts wore woven bark cloaks and painted their skin to match the jungle. Some went barefoot, trained to feel the earth like animals. They did not carry drums, they carried silence. War in the Khmer Empire was seasonal, timed with the monsoon cycles. As the rains fell, rivers rose, and so did fleets. Warboats carved from sacred trees glided down swollen streams, their bows painted like serpents, their hulls stacked with archers and steel. On land, elephants, symbols of royalty and power, served not just as mounts but as mobile battering rams. Their tusks were sharpened, their legs armored, their minds trained for madness. But no army moves forever, and when the fighting stopped, the war came home. In the villages surrounding Angkor, the soldiers returned changed. Some came missing limbs, others missing voices. The jungle took more than blood, it took memory. Families lit incense to call their sons back from the spirit world, unsure if the man who returned still belonged among the living. In the temple grounds, mothers would bring rice and flowers to the shrine of Terij, the eternal guardian of Angkor Wat, protector of kings and ghosts alike. They begged not for peace, they begged for mercy. And what of the kings? Did they sleep soundly behind the walls of stone and silence? Suryavarman, a builder of the temple, died far from Angkor in the heat and dust of a failed campaign in Vietnam. His body was never returned. Some say his ashes were scattered in the sea. Others whisper his soul never made it to the afterlife, that his ambition bound him to the very stones of Angkor Wat, that he walks the temple still, seen only during eclipses, crowned in fire. His successors built more temples, more roads, more statues, but the empire was shifting. The people were tired. The soil began to dry. The gods grew quiet, and new enemies circled like vultures. When the Thais, the rising force of Ayutthaya, began their incursions, the Khmer defenses cracked like old stone. The once invincible walls of Angkor stood, but the soldiers behind them thinned. The bearers dried, the priests vanished. Some say the sacred geometry itself was broken, the alignments disrupted by bad omens, broken rituals, or worse, the loss of belief. And yet, the people did not stop living. Even as the empire withered, life within Angkor Wat adapted. It transformed from a Hindu sanctuary to a Buddhist monastery. The swords were put away. The chants changed. But the echoes of conquest never left. Monks walked where generals once planned invasions. Peasant children played on the stones where kings declared war. The temple watched, unchanged, as the faces and faiths shifted. Its symbolism remained eternal, proof that power, once etched in architecture, is hard to erase. Today, tourists walk these grounds with cameras and sandals. They marvel at the carvings, they wonder at the stone, but they do not hear the footsteps of armies. They do not smell the sweat of soldiers or the incense of war prayers. They do not feel the weight of divine violence, but it is there just beneath the surface. In the corners of the bas-reliefs, where eyes have been worn away by centuries of sun and rain. In the cracks where jungle vines curled like fingers reclaiming what was stolen. In the silence of the great galleries, where one can still imagine the sound of metal scraping stone, or the low chant of warriors before battle. Angkor Wat is not a relic. It is a record of blood, of brilliance, of belief turned into battleground. It is the proof that war does not always ride on horses or arrive with fire. Sometimes it is carved carefully over decades, its weapons disguised as towers, its armies hidden in myths. The jungle may have won the war of time, but the temple, the citadel, remains, watching, waiting, a monument not just to a god or a king, but to the terrifying beauty of power expressed through sacred violence. And perhaps that is the true symbolism of Angkor Wat, that no empire can last, but every empire can haunt. Until next time, stay safe and see you in the next history.